kind of for sabotage, but it's nonviolent. The point is he wants to do something. Dalai Lama says you should have an autonomous region in China. He has given the best solution to the Chinese for 40 years, and the Chinese have spat in his face. Most people in Tibet, I'm sorry, they're for, Dharamsala, they're for independence. Students for free Tibet, it ain't for no autonomous region. Tibetan Youth Congress, no, it's not for an autonomous region. You can't get an autonomous region in China unless people kick up a fight. People are kicking up a fight. 146 people have burned themselves demanding the return of the Dalai Lama in protest. 2 of them burned themselves against gold mines, which I'll tell you about in 2009, the first 2. Hell of a kind of protest. It's a nonviolent kind of protest, right? You don't kill anybody else. Chinese trying to cover it up. There were all these protests against Chinese damming, the 25,000 dams in China. Again, about twice as many as all the other dams in the world combined, because they're all displaced. One of the dams, the Three Gorges Dam, has replaced 1.3 million people. It has replaced 13 cities and 1,000 villages. One dam. You know, pretty serious. So one of the things about this is that there's a lot of protests. People lie down against the tractors. Or the Chinese give them a vote, and then they vote against the tractors. They say, well, if you give up 50% of your land and 60% of your livestock, you can stay here. People vote that down, say, throw them all out. That was 2008. So there have been a bunch of big protests in Tibet. And the Dalai Lama does not oppose these protests, but he does not organize them, and he is not connected with them. And that's a very serious thing. Students for a Free Tibet, he doesn't oppose, and actually isn't critical of particularly. And they organize a lot of protest events with 35 chapters around the world, which is very good. But Tibet was seized by China, even though it's an independent country. And even the Palestinians, who are so brutalized by the racist state of Israel, and I am speaking kindly as a Jew toward the fascists who run Israel. I mean, the most dislikable group of people. Even Obama, the big military aider of them, finally, at last, wouldn't have done it if Hillary had been elected, decided to abstain from a UN resolution condemning the settlements. So one of the things about it is Israel has already destroyed itself as a Jewish state, meaning it can't be a democracy as a Jewish state. It's an apartheid state. And if it becomes a decent state without blowing up the world, which is a big question, one of the leading places, in addition to India and Pakistan, where the world might get blown up, if Trumpiola or Hillary and Russia and so on and so forth don't get into it, is of course Israel. And they're trying to enforce apartheid, and they're being a rogue state. And having been to the West Bank with a delegation of civil rights people, half of whom were Jewish, I can say we all understood Jim Crow from the moment we got there. It was unmistakable. It is a brutal, oppressive, nasty regime. Now, a lot of people in Israel don't like it, but there are enough people who are the other way, and there are enough people who are right-wing now, even young people. So that what has happened in America is interesting. The Democratic Party, 47%, according to the latest polling, agreed with Obama, and 45% don't. So agreeing with that's better than in Congress, right? Young people tend to get the idea that stepping on people's neck and settler colonialism ain't a great thing. Anyway, the same is true for Tibet. We have settler colonialism, and we have China madly damming the rivers. Now here's the other thing. The Chinese Academy of Sciences studied the glaciers in Tibet. It's the third pole. It's the roof of the world. The big river comes down from there at the Great Bend and makes the Brahmaputra and the Mekong and the Indus and the Salween, 11 great rivers in Asia. The glaciers are melting at twice the rate they did 30 years ago. With the damming, the fish are lost, and China has plans for more dams. They are a string of dams because they're crazy building dams. Turns out that these nutballs who run China are hydroelectric. They're really into this stuff, right? So what they do is they don't need, they're into solar power. You could provide the energy for Tibet. It's close to the sun with solar power, no problem, right? And have nomads who get to ride around, be with their yaks and have a life. Instead of which the Chinese are compelling the nomad, just like the 19th century Native Americans, off the grasslands, which are dying. They've resettled about 1 million people in concrete cantonments. So the men have nothing to do, so they go play cards and drink. And the women have nothing to do except take care of kids. There are no jobs. Oh, we provide hospital and economic development. We're really good. They were terrible in Tibet. It's all serfdom. Blah, blah, blah. So there are some more jobs for Tibetans. But the fact is, it's pretty terrible, and most of these places are far removed from medical care and education, and people are suffering. And then they've been forced out of their whole life, so you don't have to know too much about indigenous communities and the genocide against them. I've worked a lot on the Sand Creek Massacre, which drove the Cheyenne and Arapaho from Colorado. Governor Evans, that fascist SOB. Oh, he liked Lincoln. He was good on abolition. He was a monster toward indigenous people, as was Chivington, his pal. That was the founding of Colorado, driving the Cheyennes and Arapahoes from Colorado. They left some Utes who wanted to settle and, be Christian farmers. Yep. And then another governor, what was his name, Pitkin, I think? About 15 years later, he drove them out. So there's really this bad history of murder and genocide. And we have people who are living with the results of that. So I'm Jewish, so look, Jewish people tend to be paranoid, except if you've had pogroms and the Nazis and so on and so forth, might make you paranoid. Black folks tend to be worried about cops shooting you. Well, that's A, because cops shoot you, right? Black Lives Matter. And it's B, check out the history of lynching. Check out the Equal Justice Initiative. And I forgot his last name, Brian. He's a great guy. He runs it. But he's trying to put up a plaque in the South, every place they can find. And he found many more lynchings than have been reported where a black person was lynched. Because, there are, Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions. There are, names of various Klan leaders and so on, Confederate flags flying. Some came down in 2015, I believe, when that guy Roof shot up 9 people who were praying with him at the church. It's the same thing. So the elite says, all the people we've colonized, all the people we damage in Africa, they just can't do it in Africa. They got a problem in Africa. All these people. Latin America, I don't know. Do we worry about Latin America? The whole point about this is that having done so immense a damage to the peoples of the world, the so-called academic knowledge about this is full of racism. It does not start from the history of imperialism and brutality and think about, except for, again, indigenous people like a colleague of mine in social work who works on transgenerational trauma. That is the result of all this stuff. It's not so easy to get out of this. It takes time and effort. If you think about your own experiences in the war and how well you sleep at night, probably the fact that when you do things which involve tremendous trauma, including the things that you get to do, as people talked about in Operation Winter Soldier, it is the most terrible aspect, in my opinion, of being a soldier, but also the things that are done to you. It is very hard to come to terms with this. Many people don't. Senator Bob Kerrey, he was a Navy SEAL, and he was later president of the New School, and he was a member with my student Condi Rice of the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq.
Oh boy.
And when Condi was lying through her teeth in 2004 about why they had decided to go to war, and I never comment negatively on my students, ever. And so I make an exception for war criminals. So as far as it goes, she took more courses with me than any graduate student has ever taken with a professor. 8 as a master's student. I won't tell you how that was possible. It was quite an effort. Anyway, dear old Condi, she went off and did these terrible things. And she said, well, it was people like Bob Kerrey who persuaded me. And Kerry was sitting there at the hearing. I think he'd asked her the question. He said, what the hell do you mean? Right? He got mad. So he talked about being a Navy SEAL and coming up to a hut, and he went in a village, and he went in there with his guys, and they shot everybody. And it was all women and children. And he said, every time I went there afterwards, and when he was running in Nebraska, that big glitzy thing, man, he was cool. He went out with Linda Ronstadt. He was cool, Bob Kerrey. He was a beautiful human being. He was a soldier. He was a SEAL. Man, every time they said that, he said, it made me ill. Every time they said that, it made me ill. Now, not enough so we could think, right? Because if you were part of the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq, you were out of your fucking mind, right? He learned nothing. I mean, you want to talk about somebody who's destroyed by his experience. He's a pretty good example. Right? That's doubling down on doing bad things. So anyway, the Tibetans have suffered immense trauma. Now, one of the good things about the Tibetans is, I heard a funny discussion between, well, it was actually Pema Chodron talking about the Dalai Lama talking to a smart Western Buddhist psychologist. And the Western Buddhist psychologist says, well, we got a lot of guilt. And the Dalai Lama couldn't figure out what the hell he meant. Because the Tibetans suffer a lot, but they don't have a lot of guilt. That's a Western phenomenon. It was very interesting to hear this, and worth thinking about. I mean, Dalai Lama had a hard time getting this, right? It took him a long time. He asked questions about it. He asked groups of people, he couldn't get it. So the Tibetans do various things which they regret. And he's talked about things he regretted, right? And there were some terrible things that he regretted. He gave the example as a monk who came to him and wanted to do a particular series of exercises, yoga, anyway, fancy Tibetan exercises. And the Dalai Lama said, well, you have to have, you need to be younger. Don't do it. I urge you not to do it. So sometime later, the Dalai Lama heard the guy committed suicide. course, he had a certain kind of belief in reincarnation. He thought he'd get a younger body, and he could do his yoga exercises. Needless to say, whatever there is to be said, and there's a lot in other spiritual traditions, and by the Dalai Lama, perhaps, about reincarnation, this was a little too literal. And the guy asked him, so you regret this? Yes. He said, still regret it. Yes. He said, I just don't let it stop me. Right? Yeah, I have regrets. That's very different from Western guilt in some way. Well, it's not paralyzing. So the Tibetans are remarkably resilient. I have spent time helping people learn English, and I know a little Tibetan, and when people know a little English, they communicate, and so get to talk with some of the people who came across the mountains about their experience, and a lot of people there did, and you hear a lot about it. Again, tremendous courage and resilience and trying to find a new way. Also, tremendous trauma. And this is a traumatized refugee community. And people pass through. Some stay, but many go other parts of India like Orissa, or they go to the US. So in Boulder, shucks, Naropa, right? The amazing history, or the strange history of Allen Ginsberg and Rinpoche, you see, who turns out to be Pema Chodron's teacher. So she has very funny things to say about him. One of the things she says amusingly is, his lifestyle was different from mine.
Yes.
Anyway, however, she makes him out to be not such a bad person, for whatever it's worth. But there is a serious Tibetan community here. And there's a serious Tibetan community in many places. And Tibetan Buddhism has taken flight, gone to many places. But in Tibet, they are having this tremendous fight. So the Dalai Lama is for nonviolence versus violence, but everybody's for nonviolence there now. And he's for an autonomous region inside China